I think just in terms of background and introduction, I grew up in New York City. Essentially went to school through college in New York. And actually, I attended school in every borough. I grew up in Queens. I went to grammar school in Manhattan. I went to high school in the Bronx, and I went to college in Brooklyn. I went to Pratt Institute, where I received my bachelor's in architecture and master's in city planning. And then I started my planning career, first in Westchester County, then I moved to Philadelphia for a short while, and then to San Francisco. And that was really a decision that my wife and I made. That we kind of said that where in the United States we would like to live, and San Francisco was the city we felt was kind of the best place to be, and it still is. And so it was a great decision on our part. And so we've lived here in San Francisco for over 40 years. And I started with the planning department in 1973 and was with the department for 23 years through 1996. So it was my career, my kind of professional public career was here in the planning department. And I think it was just incredibly rewarding and satisfying, because I think the planning department was always kind of at the forefront of planning. And you kind of asked, on reflecting on what do I see today, and I still see the department as being at the cutting edge of planning. And it's, I look around town and I see what's happening today compared to kind of, almost like pioneers now, looking at 40 years ago. The things we started, the small steps, have become kind of giant leaps, I think, in this time period. And just to kind of give you examples, planning, traditionally, gets implemented through zoning. That's kind of when planning first kind of started. City Beautiful movement, almost civil engineers were the first planners. They laid out roads, and it was an engineering project, in essence. And ultimately, people said, well, cities should be beautiful, and cities should, there should be more organization in terms of land use. And ultimately, that's how zoning started to develop as a form of regulation. And actually, San Francisco, I think, was the first city in the country that actually used zoning and land use restrictions. And unfortunately, it wasn't in a positive way. It was in a negative way in terms of trying to restrict where Chinese laundries, was an issue in terms of where they were located in the city. In a way, it probably made sense to be in neighborhoods because it was close to where people live. But then again, if you were next to a laundry, you didn't want the water and whatever it took to the steam pots and whatever it took to wash laundry. But anyway, I think from then we've kind of used the tool to organize land use and to make cities what they are today, more organic and logical places for people to live, work, and enjoy their life. So with that start, then also came the challenges. How do you implement other aspects of plans, like open space, for example? As planning evolved, it got more departmentalized in the sense of various areas of expertise. And transportation was always there, kind of traditional land use of where you put residences and commercial, whatever. That was kind of the basic format, and that really served planners and planning for many years. Then things got more sophisticated, and also needs became more obvious. Things weren't necessarily always done right. Not all neighborhoods were met. Their needs were met properly. So I think planning started looking at neighborhoods and specific needs of different neighborhoods. Open space, things like seismic safety also came into play. I mean, a whole host of other issues as they evolved and as people became aware. These various elements of the master plan started evolving, as opposed to just one plan where it was a kind of a City Beautiful plan. It was just an organizational plan that showed traffic ways and streets and properties and basics. The planning became just more more intricate and at a finer and finer scale, and kind of boring down to kind of more and more needs, and also more sophisticated in the sense of mixed-use planning and incorporating mixed use. I mean, mixed use traditionally in the old days might have been a store under apartment house, like your corner stores. Then you had neighborhood commercial areas, more evolved shopping areas, and then you also had the evolution of land use changes. Like San Francisco was traditionally, early on, a very industrial city. I mean, you had a lot of breweries here, you had the railroad yards, it was a shipping center. Most of the shipping came to San Francisco initially because it was called break bulk, where things came on ships, and they literally had nets where you took cargo off of boats with big nets and you put them on the land, and you had stevedores, the dock workers. It was very labor intensive. And again, that kind of, once they went to container shipping, that went to Oakland, and slowly the industry started leaving San Francisco. Historically, different concept. We had a lot of buildings here that were multi-story vertical industrial buildings. They became empty because in the 50s, 60s, and 70s, industry wanted to move horizontally, and so you started having areas of the city that were just emptying out. San Francisco was lucky in the sense that you still had merchandising marts and things like that moved into these buildings, like Showplace Square became a major trade center for furniture and furnishings and design community. And even that now has changed as that's kind of gone online. And so the point is the economy and how we live and how we do business has changed over time. And land use and how we use land and the existing facilities and infrastructure needs to shift and adjust to the changing patterns of how we live. Because right now, Showplace Square, you have Zigna there, and you have a lot of computer-oriented firms moving in. It's mostly office-type space, even as opposed to Showplace, whatever. We do most things now online, and to the extent that even retail space, like at Union Square, which is an intense shopping area, but even retailing has changed from going in and actually buying something, where retail stores now are really a place where you go to look at things so you can kind of see them physically, but then you go buy them online. So I think the whole concept of how we're going to be shopping, right now the trend again is changing. I mean, groceries are getting delivered to people's homes. You're doing almost everything online because everyone's too busy to do the basic things they used to do by foot. So that's kind of just an interesting, kind of in my lifetime in terms of kind of a major change of how people live from traditional ways. I think, up to the 50s and 60s, the way people lived and interacted with their environment hadn't changed much, maybe for 100 years. I mean, you had little stores, you had shops that built things, made things, and you had, and you went to your merchant to buy things. That's all changing now, and it's changed in a matter of actually 20 years, and it's still evolving. So that's a major challenge for planning, to recognize those things, possibly sometimes even to anticipate them and to plan for them. In terms of implementing plans, I'd like to use as an example recreation and open space, because when I first came here, the first open space plan was developed, the recreation and open space element. And the question was, well, okay, we've got the plan, now how do you make it happen? And the concept was, well, let's sell the plan to the community and get the community to fund it. And that was done through what was then called Proposition C. It was put on the ballot, and it basically said, look, we're going to put I think it was a modest amount, it was like 10 cents on the real estate tax, to generate funds which would then be dedicated to the acquisition and development of open space. And now that's a program that's been ongoing. As funds ran out, there were new Prop Cs or whatever the alphabetical letter happened to be that covered it. But that was one way of implementing plans, of using bond funds and public funding to implement planning. And that's been, a pattern now. And that fund that was also, was initially organized to buy open spaces and then to improve open spaces, and there was a certain formula for doing that. And I think that's continued over time, even until now. We're still kind of using that as a model for funding. So that was kind of, I think, an innovative step back in the 70s, and now it's kind of, well, that's just how you do it in the 90s. And the whole notion of livable cities, of public realm improvements, again, when the downtown plan was adopted in '85, and then I had a significant role in drafting that. Dean Macris was director at the time. And again, how do we do public improvements? How do we get, there's always a challenge of how do you incorporate and achieve general public agendas within a planning context where you're mostly relying on the private sector to build office buildings, stores, housing, whatever. How do you use the private market and the private efforts to get public benefits, which also includes affordable housing. And one of the tools that we used at the time, which was available, was CEQA, the California Environmental Quality Act, which basically said, if a project has a significant impact, then you either have to mitigate that significant impact, or the public body has to make overriding findings of public benefit to override those significant impacts. The body politic was, reluctant to make those findings of overriding public necessity, and basically what we did was kind of tell the private sector, if you don't help us figure out how to solve public issues like affordable housing, that was specifically one of the main ones, is that, and this was with respect to office buildings. The logic being that office and commercial development was creating jobs, but housing wasn't being built at a speed rapidly enough to meet the demand that was created by the office development. And so the logic was that, look, you're creating jobs, you're bringing people into the city, you're creating a housing crisis and putting pressure on the housing market. You have a responsibility to help provide housing and see housing built in response to the demand that you're generating. And so we use CEQA, basically saying, look, that's a significant impact on the environment. So unless you mitigate that, your project can't be approved. And so the private sector acknowledged that, and that's how we started the affordable housing funds that now are active in the city and the affordable housing programs. And then that ultimately extended to even private market housing, where, again, the nexus was that people were building private market rate housing, but there wasn't enough affordable housing being built. And so the inclusionary housing concept was evolved and brought into even private housing development, of saying, look, you're building housing, but you're not building housing where it's needed most, which is at affordable levels. And so the private market developer need to do something, and so the set-asides or the contributions to housing funds were mechanisms for achieving that. So that was kind of how planning, this is a departure from when I first started as a planner, of actually being an activist in terms of finding out and trying to develop ways to get the market and the private sector to become a partner in building cities and meeting the needs of cities. And that's been an ongoing process now that's kind of been honed to an art form here in San Francisco, where all types of public realm improvements now are being, your sidewalk improvements, your street improvements, your various beautification projects are being incorporated. The downtown plan, also was, I think, just very remarkable at the time it was adopted in '85. We included childcare. We saw that more and more women and families were going to the workplace, and there wasn't any opportunity for childcare, and so requiring childcare centers was something that was in the downtown plan. Or requiring open space on site in downtown office buildings. Got us a lot of rooftop open spaces and made the city a much more livable and attractive place, which I think we're all enjoying now. So I think those were kind of major steps, in the evolution of planning that I saw as a practitioner here in San Francisco. That, kind of passing the torch to this generation of planners. And I see it continuing. I look around town now and I see all the beautification improvements on the various streets, the greening streets program, the pavement to parks program. These are all things that now are flourishing. That actually, like the pavement for parks was something that we tried doing back in the 70s. When we put bulbs out in sidewalks to try to slow traffic and to create neighborhood open spaces, and there was actually opposition to that program. And ultimately it kind of stopped and funding got cut off. And now I'm really kind of pleased to see that the pendulum has swung the other way. And that kind of brings me to community participation. One of my first responsibilities in the department was I headed up the neighborhood planning program. And what was kind of attractive about the program then was that the city was getting $25 million in federal block grant funds. So, this is what planners want. They not only want to do plans, but they want to have the wherewithal to implement them. And so we had $25 million a year to program for community improvements. And so a lot of the beautification projects that happened in the 70s were funded through the block grant. Community neighborhood centers, a lot of the neighborhood centers that you see around the city were funded rehabilitated through the block grant program. And a lot of beautification programs were done. And it was also a way to begin to sell planning and involve the community. I think planners just don't work and aren't successful when they plan on their own, but when they involve the community. And I see that kind of outreach now even more active today than it was. But again, it's a organic process, a process where you bring the whole community along, and that's that. Offering, having $25 million available and to say to neighborhoods, look, we have this money, how would you like to spend it in your neighborhood? Created, awareness within neighborhoods that yes, you have control over your environment, that the planning department, the planning process is a way to affect change in your neighborhood, to make your neighborhood a better neighborhood. And that started building a very strong, community constituency for planning, and the various neighborhood associations in San Francisco, and they all have zoning and planning committees, because they saw planning as our department as a vehicle to make their neighborhood a better neighborhood, not just on paper, but in reality. And I was just kind of looking in your lobby here in the display of the first graders at Commodore Sloat School, and I was really impressed because I just kind of was reflecting on that and saying, we're down now, bringing this process down to first graders, the planning process, the neighborhood planning process. Kind of when I was a practitioner, it was adults doing what now first graders are doing. So it was kind of really heartening to see that, to see first graders thinking about energy, water use, recycling, places to meet, all the kind of things that planners think about and are trained about, and here we have first graders doing it. So it was kind of touching to see that. So again, the importance of the neighborhood associations in the city is critical in all the planning work that was done. For example, like neighborhood commercial, all the kind of evolution of how, again, neighborhoods wanted to take more control over their environment and control what happens in their neighborhood. Branch banks were the first kind of boogeyman in the 70s. They were just exploding all over the place, and gas stations, and then real estate offices, video stores. That was another just kind of major thing. When videos and video rentals were the rage, every everyone wanted to put a Blockbuster in a neighborhood commercial area, and and people didn't want the traffic generated, and the coming in, going out of renting these things, returning these things. And again, it's kind of interesting to see these trends. Like, what's a video rental now? You don't do it. You do it online, or you buy a DVD. No one, you download, you stream. You don't do it. So that's just a kind of a little aside, is how often what is a planning issue today is really often a fad. And I think we need to recognize that, and it's gone tomorrow. But again, it's easy to look hindsight. No one expected things to change, as quickly as it did, in terms of how we live, and especially with media. It's just with computers and the internet now. It's just it's a different world, and so I think planning needs to respond to that. I think we are, but I guess just the point though is that often there are land use fads, something or like the .com bubble that and we're kind of experiencing a bubble again today. Now with internet-based businesses. It's generating an incredible number of jobs, and things like Salesforce, the tenant in the largest new building to be built in the city. And I think that's all good. It's creating jobs. It's maintaining the economic vitality. It's just you have to be cautious, because you wonder, well, what's the next technological leap that's going to make all of this obsolete or surpass it? So you always have to kind of be somewhat cautious and somewhat trying to anticipate the future, and where's this all going? So that's more an aside, but it's kind of an important thing to say, because we often tend to react to something and then find out that an issue today is really a non-issue tomorrow because things change. You have a question? I think you're.
I mean, I do have a question, but it's going in a completely opposite direction from the direction you're going. So I would be interested in hearing, as much as you're comfortable sharing, more in depth about how you came into, about your own, like, the development of your own career and how you came into the planning field. Going back as far as you want to your BA in architecture, or even just your experiences of cities growing up.
Right. Yeah. As I started, I grew up in New York City, and I'm a city person. I love cities. I felt I had a very privileged, childhood, in the sense that I lived in Queens, around the corner from BNT elevated subway station. With a dime, I could go to Manhattan, and that's what I did as a kid. I mean, I would go to Central Park and go to the 59th Street station, get off, go to Bloomingdale's, walk the store. Bloomingdale's in New York takes up a whole block. It's like Macy's here in San Francisco. That's what I would do as a kid. I would, explore the city, and on my own. I mean, it's amazing. My parents would let me, do that, and but that's what I did. So it was, I was transit dependent, but New York City has a great transit system. I mean, I would go to Alpine Park in Queens on bus and subway, and take hamburger meat and build a fire and have lunch, make my own lunch, and come back. This is like when 10, 11 years old. Once I started riding a bicycle, I rode my bike all over the place. As I say, it was in Astoria, in Queens. I would ride out to Flushing Meadow Park, and I would go many miles on my bike and explore the city. It wouldn't be uncommon for me to go to Manhattan. I had tropical fish, and one of the best places to buy tropical fish in New York was in the Wall Street area. I would go down to the Wall Street area on a Saturday. Nothing there; it's all dead on a Saturday. But the pet stores that deal in tropical fish would be open, because normally during the week they probably sold to all the stock financial people that had fancy aquariums, and I'd go down there and get my fish in a little plastic bag and bring them home. and it wouldn't even be uncommon for me to walk, from Wall Street to 59th Street Bridge. I walked that bridge many times. And actually, that's one of the things I really kind of feel sad about in cities is the inability to walk and move around. And I think it's a real, the 59th Street Bridge used to have a pedestrian walkway. You'd walk up a big tower on 59th Street side. You'd be able, there's a pathway, a dedicated pedestrian walkway. You could walk to Queens in a big giant, maybe 300-foot tower. You kept walking down, and you landed up where Silver Cup Bread is, which is often used in movies. Whenever you see movies of Manhattan, Silver Cup Bread, it's no longer there as a bread company, but it's the building there, and it's kind of funny when I watch movies, and I know all these buildings, having walked around them. But no, you could do that as a kid. Then when I had a bike, I could take my bike up, walk them up the stairs, and right to Manhattan. I'd meet my friends. Since I went to school in every borough. So I same with like the Triborough Bridge. There's a walkway you could cycle over, walk over, and you can't do here. It's very sad. You can't get from San Francisco to Oakland if you wanted to walk or ride a bicycle. That's something for the future. I found living in the city just incredibly satisfying and fulfilling and interesting. And as I say, I would, on a Saturday, to save a dime or a quarter, I'd walk from lower Manhattan to 59th Street Bridge, walk over the bridge to my home. I don't know how many miles that was, but I was a kid. So anyway, I loved cities, and I always felt kind of I wanted to make cities and this urban environment a beautiful place and a satisfying place to live in, which is the experience I had. To say, hey, this is good, but it can be better, and that's what motivated me to become a planner.
How did you hear about planning? What was the hook that drew you in? I always wanted to be either an architect or planner. And I started in architecture because I thought that would be the way to make cities beautiful, is to design beautiful buildings and beautiful environments. And it was always within an urban context, not suburban. And so that's why I went to architecture school, and then I decided that really I didn't want to just do individual buildings. I wanted to look at the bigger picture, to look at how the whole cities work, how urban areas and urban systems work, and and to make to work on the framework for making cities. Where architects kind of build the buildings and design the buildings, but the organization of cities, the kind of broader concept for cities is what I wanted to be involved in, and that's what I did. What were some of the sort of hot topics when the things that people were excited about in the field when you first got to planning?
Well, okay, my kind of first job was in White Plains, New York, which is a suburban hub, of New York, and it was a three-man planning office, three-person planning office. It was men then, but and I got to do everything in that planning office. Grant writing was one of the first things I did, and I was very successful in doing garnering open space funds for White Plains. And then it had a downtown, and it was just kind of beginning to build it, where major commercial developers wanted to build satellite office buildings, because White Plains has a railroad station, a direct line to Grand Central, so it was a very logical place to do satellite development, and so it fell upon me to basically write the codes for the development. And one of the things I did was research, well, who's doing what's innovative? And I looked up San Francisco's planning code, and wow, they're doing incentive zoning, And so kind of that was the, the big innovative, thing in planning, in San Francisco, they're giving you height and bulk and bonuses, FAR bonuses for doing a short walking distance, for doing plazas, various items. I mean, I know plazas was one, arcades, shortened walking distance. I'm trying to remember what they were, and so that's it. Gee, you can use zoning and planning as a tool to get things. So that was kind of exciting. So the White Plains zoning code now had incentive zoning. I kind of borrowed that from San Francisco. And I think that's what kind of almost started that process. I mean, it's kind of like what I learned in the beginning, like grantsmanship, small funds for open space, ultimately translated to block grant, bigger funds for open space here in the city. Once you start seeing the possibilities and the tools and say, hey, you can do things. And I think that's what's, I think that's what's been satisfying about working in San Francisco. I think being a planner in the city is probably the luckiest place to be for planning, because so much is happening. You can not only do the plans, but see them accomplished in your lifetime, if not in a few years. I mean, it's kind of from drawing board to reality is something that, because development has always been active, so things have always been happening and the plans have been implemented. So to see that happen has been very satisfying. And then on the other hand, there's also the conservation and preservation movement, and that's happened here also in San Francisco to a very large extent, where people recognize that, we don't want everything new. We have a lot of building and values and communities and neighborhoods that are worth preserving. And so maintaining that balance between preservation and allowing for new development is something I think has been successful in the city. I mean, often obviously there's tension, but it's worked, and it's remarkable how, like, neighborhoods in particular, how little they've changed in 40 years since I've been here. It's they still feel the same, except they're better, quite frankly. Obviously there's more wealth in the city. San Francisco in the 50s and 60s into the early 70s was really a working class city, but as those breweries and those factories left, and as more office and white collar work came in, white collar demanded higher wages, and so homes that were owned by and lived in by factory workers, from the 20s through the 50s, were slowly being purchased by professionals that were renewing them, and that wealth has basically made the city a more attractive city, but also has resulted in a housing cost crisis because it's so nice, everyone wants to be here, and therefore it's expensive. So that's still a challenge, and it's going to be an ongoing challenge for San Francisco because we're a peninsula. There isn't any more land, and there's pressure to come here, and there's really very little place to go other than up, and so and that's what's been happening. Rincon Hill, for example, I was involved in the initial Rincon Hill plan. As those neighborhoods were changing, it clearly came to the challenge of where do you find opportunities to build new housing, particularly where there won't be extreme community opposition, because again, the established neighborhoods are very jealous of their character and the quality of life, and so where in the city can you build housing? And so Rincon Hill, south of Market now, and then Mission Bay, which was another major opportunity, and the waterfront, the southern waterfront now, are the major opportunity areas and where things are being built, and that's where the city's been growing. Now, what happens after those get built out? I'm going to let the next generation of planners figure that one out. But it's going to be, that massive, I think we're good for today. We still have the land resources, and we're using them and zoning them, and they're being built out. But in 10 years, 15 years, maybe it'll be time to declare San Francisco done. You know, it's the city's finished. we built it, and now, let's go somewhere else. And maybe that's the challenge, is to go and see, okay, now where else can you duplicate the quality of life you have in San Francisco? And it could be Oakland. I mean, I know in other parts of the Bay Area, they will mature. San Jose is growing, is becoming and maturing as a city. And I think that's what will happen. I think people will have to declare, or it will be by acclamation, San Francisco is now finished, built out, and it'll be Oakland, San Jose, and who knows where.
I was wondering if you could describe the department when you first got here, what sort of work you were doing, and what it was like compared to other departments you worked in before.
And maybe specifically the role, the part of the department that you came into,
yeah.
And how your career transitioned.
Okay. Well, okay. Alan Jacobs was a director of planning when I came in '73, and as I indicated, my wife and I decided San Francisco was the city we wanted to live in, and I was fortunate to get a temporary job here to do the police facilities element of the general plan. And in the '70s, San Francisco was in its summer of love, lots of long hair, long beards, loose clothes. I, coming from back east, kind of came dressed the way you see me now. And Alan, who had met me at a Boston APA conference, said, Lou's probably just the right guy to work with the police department. Someone had to wear a tie and a white shirt. So I think it was kind of a cultural thing of saying, we can't send one of our hippie planners over to the police department, they'll go crazy. And so, you get a, suit-wearing, tie-wearing, white shirt Easterner, and you send them over to the police department. So it worked out very well, and I did the police facilities plan. And that, entailed a lot of community outreach, because at the time they were struggling with the issue of how many police stations. San Francisco has neighborhood police stations, and whether you consolidate them, do you do one major central facility, do you consolidate some of the smaller facilities? And so we did a pretty exhaustive analysis of the pros and cons and the operational implications of various configurations, and had neighborhood outreach meetings. Well, what if we close your police station? And ultimately, the bottom line was neighborhoods didn't want their police stations closed, even if they were inefficient. The police stations aren't like fire stations where you want them close to distributed geographically, so they're close to various areas. Police stations generally are kind of marshalling places where officers come. They go out in the beat, they go in the car, and they drive, and so there isn't really the necessity for them to be localized. However, the communities still like to have a neighborhood station. They like to be able to talk to their police chief, and police stations in the city function as little community centers. I mean, you have usually meeting rooms in those police stations, and people come, neighborhood groups come to talk about, you sometimes have their neighborhood meetings there, sometimes you just meet there monthly to talk about police issues, crime issues, whatever. So again, San Francisco is a very neighborhood-oriented city. It's very jealous of its neighborhood resources, which included police stations. So ultimately the plan said, keep the 9 police stations that are there. And I think since then, there are probably 1 or 2 more neighborhood stations in San Francisco. That process, at that time, the planning department wasn't doing much neighborhood outreach. It was the traditional zoning, permit processing. The planning department had just finished doing the urban design plan, which had a following in the sense that, again, community leaders that were reacting basically again to the Fontana Towers. I mean, that's what kind of brought Alan Jacobs to San Francisco, is when people realized that the zoning would allow things that would really make this a horrible place to live. That people would build buildings to block views. So there was an agenda, is to say we want a plan that keeps neighborhoods whole and maintains the quality of life for neighborhoods. And the urban design plan, which was a citywide urban design plan, looked at all the various components that make up San Francisco: the topography, vegetation, climate change, how the fog rolls in and out, and how weather is affected by in various neighborhoods. It was a very comprehensive study, and I assume it's still here in the library somewhere. I mean, there were background studies. It was probably about a foot of analysis, and then the urban design plan. And out of that urban design plan came the height and bulk portion of the planning code. Before the urban design plan, all you had was land use zoning, and the zoning was very simple at the time also. I think you just had single family, two family, then residential, commercial, industrial, and then downtown commercial. So you had, I think, just two categories of residential, either single family or multifamily. You had your C1 and C2 commercial, which were your neighborhood commercial districts. You had your C3, which was downtown. And then you had your M1 and M2 industrial manufacturing districts. And that was basically it. And maps that kind of designated that with no height limits. So you could basically, I think there might have been FAR controls, I don't remember, but there weren't really, so density was, I think, controlled either through FAR, floor area ratio, for those folks who don't know what that is, or but I don't think there were any height limits at the time. So it was pretty freewheeling, and you almost kind of came in with your plans to the city and said, well, I want to do this, and if it seemed reasonable, it was approved. So the urban design plan, the result of that was a comprehensive overlay of heights and height districts throughout the city. And 40 feet kind of became the umbrella height over the whole city, nothing higher than 40. And then in the downtown, the urban design plan, called for kind of the downtown pyramid, which kind of a downtown hill. So heights kind of crescendoed around California and Sansom Street, approximately. The downtown commercial buildings would kind of create a hill of office buildings. So, and then there were some other higher heights where there were already existing buildings. And basically, I think the urban design plan and the height limits kind of reflected what was there pretty much. So in the Tenderloin, you had a 65-foot height limit because you already had 6-story buildings there to begin with. So it pretty much kind of mirrored the development pattern that was in the city. But that process started, again, community awareness of planning, and that planning can be used as a tool to shape and control the environment. Kind of the other major event that happened was the freeway revolt, which with the 50s and 60s, where the state and the federal government wanted to build freeways through San Francisco. They wanted to connect the Golden Gate Bridge with the Bay Bridge and with 101, and so there was really a ring of highways. We're talking about highways, limited access highways planned for San Francisco, and vestiges remained after the Panhandle was going to be a major link to 19th Avenue. 19th Avenue was a major link to Golden Gate Bridge. The Embarcadero Freeway, part of which was built, was going to continue along the waterfront past Fort Mason, right to the Golden Gate Bridge. So the city would have been a pretty horrible place had that been implemented. And again, neighborhood activists, and I'll mention Sue Bierman, who was very active in the freeway revolt, and then became a planning commissioner for many years on the commission. What was a major, person that was very instrumental in kind of carrying that torch and leading that charge. And again, all those, the freeway revolt, the urban design plan, the Fontana Towers, when people began to see, the horrors that planners can cause, and I will even throw in redevelopment, because again, the 50s and 60s, the concept of rebuilding cities and wholesale demolition was kind of the vogue. It was happening in many cities. And same with this highway. You had the Highway Trust Fund in the 50s. After World War II, Eisenhower was president. They established a Federal Highway Trust Fund, which was basically your 10 to 17 cents federal tax on a gallon of gasoline, which translated into a lot of money, and people went out to spend it and to build highways all over the country and through cities. And one of the rationales for that trust fund was that, well, we need these highways to move military forces and military equipment in case the U.S. gets invaded. Cold War was on, and we needed to protect ourselves. So these are things that kind of people like you maybe aren't aware of. That's where people's heads were, 50 years ago or 60 years ago. So that's why we're doing this, so I can tell you. What the thinking was and what the rationales were, whether guided or misguided, and so anyway, that's where those kind of things came from, and it was fortunately there were some people that said, wait a minute, this doesn't make sense, so all those kind of currents, the opposition to freeways, the urban design plan in opposition to projects like the Fontana Towers. Again, for those who don't know Fontana Towers, there are two large blocks of buildings at Fisherman's Wharf that are about 15 stories high, and they basically create a wall. And what's even more kind of sad about those buildings, they were called single corridor loaded buildings, which means that you go up in an elevator, it's 15 stories tall, the hallways are open and they face toward the city, and all the apartments face the view toward Tiburon and Angel Island and Alcatraz. So if someone was just totally greedy and saying, I'm going to build two of these buildings, I'm just going to turn my back on the city and just optimize my value, which is the view, and take it for myself. And people saw that as a very selfish and destructive attitude, and a lot of kind of the animosity toward developers and builders kind of stemmed from that kind of attitude, where people said, hey, look, developers, they don't care about the city, they're just caring about the bottom line, and they're just going to do and optimize for themselves, maximum profit, and hell with everyone else. And that's, I think, part of what planning tries to do, is to get that balance to recognize that, look, yes, we need development, the cities grow, cities change, but let's make sure that development is respectful of the community at large. And I think and same with the highways. I mean, they were doing the same thing. They were just plowing through neighborhoods, not caring about what the impacts would be on people that have to live next to these things. Planning got a lot of its kind of community strength and philosophical strength and moral strength from kind of the mistakes and abuses of development, of development that was just single focused and not inclusive of all the other points of view that I think you need to take into consideration when you're building cities and environments. So that's kind of the groundwork that I kind of stepped into, and talking about the freeway revolt, and I think my contribution. Maybe it's going to be a question you might be asking as well. What was kind of one of the most important things that I think I did as a planner here in San Francisco? And I'm going to answer that now. It's the demolition of the Embarcadero Freeway and all the freeway infrastructure around Transbay. And, because I reflected on it, in terms of like, well, what will I tell you if you ask me that question? and it's basically, I was director from 92 to 96. We had the Loma Prieta earthquake in 1989. So all of those freeways were shattered and damaged by the earthquake. And the question was, well, what do we do with them? And when I was made appointed planning director, the city was on a track to rebuild and to repair that whole freeway system, to repair the Embarcadero Freeway and that whole infrastructure, just to keep it in place and to do it. And I was director, and the city was already online to get $15 million to do those repairs. And two planners, I will mention their names, Rebecca Colstrin and Bill Wyko, which was still here, as environmental review officer. They were transportation planners in the department, in the transportation section. And they kind of did the analysis and came to me and said, Lou, the city is better off not repairing those freeway infrastructures. They don't really contribute to traffic flow. They don't help the city. So they were kind of talking from the traffic and transportation point of view. And I kind of saw it from another point of view, saying they take up a lot of land, a lot of valuable land, and those elevated freeways also are a blight on the surrounding neighborhood and properties. And what would the city be like if you took them down and then had that land now to build? And I made the decision and advocated that no, we should not rebuild those freeways. We should not take the $15 million, and we should tear them down. And I made that position well known. Actually, the mayor at the time, Frank Jordan, supported me in that. But there were other forces in the city that were opposed. I mean, they were kind of outraged, like, how dare you, suggest that, especially since we went through all the trouble to get $15 million, you're going to lose the city $15 million. And I said, hey, look, the city will make that back in tax revenue, in real estate tax revenue, in spades over time, and we'll have a better city. And again, a planner doesn't make these kind of decisions themselves and by themselves. The community ultimately also recognized the value and there was the community pressure and support ultimately. And there was no pushback also, like Chinatown at the time, felt that was a lifeblood, in terms of, the Chinese community had, expanded into the broader Bay Area, and Chinatown itself saw the Broadway ramp and the Embarcadero Freeway as kind of a lifeline. That, well, all the people that live in the East Bay or come from the peninsula to Chinatown, this is how they come in. They take the freeway. And if you tear it down, it's going to make it more difficult for them to get to Chinatown. And, so we don't want the freeway torn down, we want it rebuilt. And the same kind of pressure came from other people with respect to the Central Freeway that connected to Franklin and Gough Streets. People that use that in the Panhandle to get onto the freeway to Bay Bridge and to go south, they felt, well, no, we have to have that, otherwise there'll be, traffic jams and we'll never be able to get onto the freeways. And as we see, those fears were proved wrong. Traffic flows. Actually, for a while, traffic is pretty intense now, and that's kind of just a general reaction, as having lived in the city for 40 years. There are more cars, but that's because there are more people. When I was director, the population here in San Francisco was about 750,000. So actually, after the freeways went down, traffic moved better because there were fewer on-ramps, fewer mergers, fewer conflicts, and 101 and the Bay Bridge and traffic as a whole, movement was superior post-earthquake after the freeways went down. Now things are again tightening up, but there are 100,000 more people living in the city, and we built many more millions of square feet of office and commercial space, and we've built thousands of new housing units in the city. So yeah, things are, seem to me that there's more traffic, it's moving, but it's not because we didn't rebuild the freeways. It's because there are more people and things have changed.
That's a fascinating story, and I was interested in, you said that clearly I've heard that there were some community groups that were divided about whether the freeway should come down or not. And it seems like you alluded to there was also internal city dialogue, maybe perhaps among different departments. So I was wondering if you could talk to how the planning department, which had land use and transportation divisions, interfaced and was able to be the dominant dialogue when other city agencies are specifically transportation related, and how were you able to convince others to come along, and who was the opposition by department?
Well, it was, Public Works, it's Public Works by definition, and building freeways, and roadways and keeping traffic moving is a public work. And I think ultimately, the pressure came because people just don't want change. You kind of want what you're used to, and people just wanted to go back to normal. And which is kind of interesting because I just read A Crack at the Edge of the World, which is the history of the 1906 earthquake. And the same thing happened. You had the Burnham Plan, which was finished in 1905, delivered, I believe, a day before the earthquake. But copies were available after the earthquake. And rather than implement the Burnham Plan, the city just went on to rebuild what was there. We got a plan, but we want what we're familiar with. And that was kind of the reaction in 1989 after the earthquake as well. We just want to get business back to usual, and people had these perceived, notions of the benefits, and I think, so it was basically, the chief administrative officer and public works that were responsible for rebuilding the city. They got the grants. They worked with the feds to get the 15 million. They did the lobbying, and then to all of a sudden have the planning department say, "Hey, no, don't do it." They weren't happy about that because they were on track to do something. And I think the case we made, the fact of, look, we have all this land available that now becomes a resource for very meaningful and optimal urban development, which if you rebuild a freeway will just stay compromised the way it was. No one wanted to build along those freeway ramps. They were dark, they were shady. They're cold, they're noisy, they're air polluting. There's nothing, you could say nice about an elevated freeway in a city. They do that no matter where they are, in whatever city they are. They become, major dividers of cities. They're just unattractive and they're a blight. Freeways, elevated freeways, or freeways in general, if they're cutting through cities, they're a blight. And this was an opportunity to remove a blight and to recapture prime land right adjacent to downtown. And again, as I say, my whole planning career, if what's the greatest thing I ever did, that's what I did. And myself and the staff. They were behind me. They did the analysis. I was able to sell the analysis, and ultimately just kind of made sense. When you looked at it, you didn't have to be a genius to realize that there's really value here. And we did do some of the economic analysis. So I was saying, look, if you develop this along kind of downtown higher density values, this is the real estate tax revenue you'll get from this, and forget the $15 million. And once I think the technicians started doing the traffic analysis and started feeling more comfortable. And the point is, they weren't working anyway, so we were kind of operating without them post-earthquake because they were damaged. You couldn't use them. So we had the experience of, well, what's it like not to have them? And things were working. And as I say, they were probably working better because some of the on-ramps were damaged. So traffic was flowing, and lucky that they were damaged to the point where they couldn't be used. And I'm trying to remember whether there was even a ballot measure put on to remove the freeways. I just can't remember that for sure. I'd have to look, but I know a community constituency developed around that, because and public pressure ultimately, became brought to bear on the fact that no, we don't want to rebuild these freeways. And then the rest really is history, in terms of, then the whole new round, the Embarcadero, the way we have it today, the parkway with the streetcar F line running down it, and Rincon Hill, and the whole south of Market now, core new development. It all really was the demolition of Transbay Terminal, and what's happening right now. We're kind of building a new adjunct to downtown, which wouldn't have happened and wouldn't be happening to the quality that is happening today if the freeways had been rebuilt. And so, I'm pleased and very satisfied that as a planner I was able to be significantly involved in making that decision. And that's my gift to San Francisco.
Well, that's a good one. I'll take it.
Going back a bit, what was the next? What were a couple of the things you worked on after you worked on the police station element?
Well, as I mentioned,
And was that in the long range division, or was it called
yeah,
something different?
it was a long range planning. You had as opposed to implementation, those were the two divisions of the department. You had implementation, which was the day-to-day permit processing, and long-range planning, which was developing the master plan and the various elements, and then developing, we were called plans and programs, because not only were we responsible for doing the plans, but also programs to implement those plans and strategies for implementing those plans. So then, as I indicated, I headed up the neighborhood planning program, which again had the $25 million a year block grant program, and I did that for a number of years. And then, also involved, interspersed, I did the Civic Center master plan. Whenever it was a little, various elements need to be done, I was responsible for doing that, but as part of also kind of the neighborhood planning effort. And then kind of my next major step was heading up special projects, which was the review of the major development projects. So even though that was kind of an implementation program function, because of the importance of major new development, office buildings, major residential developments, it was under the director's office, and so I basically was responsible to the director in terms of reviewing major development projects. And I mostly did that when Dean was director. I was responsible for neighborhood planning while Okamoto was director, and then, as you know, Dean came back as director. So I was head of special projects, which entailed principally reviewing all the major development proposals that were done, from the 80s, basically through 92 when I became planning director. But within that, I was also responsible for being a key person in terms of developing the downtown plan, the 1985 downtown plan. The first conceptual document guiding downtown development, which kind of laid out the framework for the downtown plan, that had all the kind of features that kind of continued on, today in terms of the Section 309 reviews, where all the various aspects. The idea of, we made a philosophical shift when we did the downtown plan. Prior to that, the downtown zoning kind of relied on the bonus method of kind of getting public benefit, which I described, plazas, short walking distance, arcades, access to public transit. Those were various items that were enumerated in the code, and if a developer incorporated these into his project, he would get basically additional FAR. And what we made as a kind of a fundamental decision in developing the new downtown plan was the notion that, no, we're not going to use incentives to get what we feel the city should have in terms of public realm benefits. We're going to require it. And that was a major shift. And again, I think a major innovation in terms of planning. Other cities weren't doing it. Like when we were giving up the bonus system, other cities were still adopting bonus systems as a method for implementing plans. And so we made a decision. Look, you want to build in this city. You have a responsibility to do public realm improvements. And so that's when the whole notion of childcare, open space, so the rooftop plazas, all those requirements, ground floor retail, we kind of looked at, part of the downtown plan was, well, what was wrong with the kind of the 60s and 70s crop of office buildings? And well, one is that they were all kind of cookie cutters to the extent that they all took advantage of the bonus system. So you had buildings with big plazas, not necessarily, effective plazas, but they put them in because to them it was just more floor area that they could build. So the buildings were designed to optimize their floor area ratio, as and they did whatever we required, but it was done not necessarily the way you'd want it to be done. And kind of another major criticism was office buildings all wanted to have kind of their luxury lobbies, so they all kind of were on the kind of the Mies van Rohe kind of model of you do the tower, you do the plaza, and you do a grand lobby and nothing else, which I think led to very sterile buildings. And so we required that the ground floor have activity other than just be a grand lobby. So we limited lobby sizes. We required retail. And the way we required retail is by saying the ground floor is free. Because we asked developers, well, why weren't you putting retail in at the ground floor? And they'd say, well, because a office floor up on the top is more valuable than a retail floor on the bottom. So this was kind of dialogue. I mean, we did work with developers and try to understand, what's motivating you, why are you building, the types of buildings you're building, why is it being designed the way it's being designed, what's kind of driving you, and then kind of our response would be, well, what can we do to get what we feel the city should have within the public realm. And so that dialogue did go on, and so when we realized that, well, we weren't getting retail on the ground floor because office was more valuable, we said, okay, the ground floor is free. It doesn't count against FAR unless you put office there. Of course, they don't want to put office there. So and I think we actually required that up to 3/4 of the ground floor, I think even still in the code now, it can be retail, and then 1/4 could be for lobby and other service functions. And then we said, look, plazas and open space, we're no longer going to give you a bonus for that. We're going to require it. You just either you build it on site, or you find space, open space, build it off site. And that's still, I think, in the downtown plan today, those notions. And then childcare, the housing contribution, those were all key elements that, pre downtown plan, we were kind of using CEQA and whatever, leverage we could bring to bear to achieve those kind of concessions. In the 1985 downtown plan, we just said, look, no, it's just going to be required. And there was, support for that. And again, in terms of politics, which again, if I don't say it, maybe no one will know. That's also when Prop M, the limitation on downtown development, was being pushed. So there is this dynamic. I mean, by 1985, you had a very active and sophisticated community that recognized that, hey, we as members of the public through the ballot can, impact planning and planning decisions. And we're still having that today. You have Prop B, the waterfront height limit initiative. So that hasn't been lost, that notion of doing planning and through the ballot. And I know this department opposed Prop B, and I would oppose it too, because planning really shouldn't be done through the ballot box. I think as planners we recognize that our job is to do the technical work to develop the plans and to lay those options out. And I think if you're bringing issues to the ballot, it means that we haven't done a good job of planning and explaining the plan, or being sensitive to the concerns of people that are opposing the plan. So, when planning propositions get on a ballot, I think it's a failure of the planning process. I read that as, or I interpret that as such. It's just that planners haven't done their job if you get to that point. But anyway, the downtown plan got adopted, but Prop M, which put a limit on of 1,500,000 square feet of office space per year, is what Prop M did, including also incorporating the 8 priority policies. I don't know whether that's been discussed by any other presenters giving their background, but again, those 8 priority policies, hope you're not going to quiz me, but I think I can repeat them, but it's neighborhood character, that the industrial area not be affected by office development, preservation, safety and seismic considerations, that our parks and open spaces may be maintained with sunlight and free of wind. And I think there's probably one other one, transit or something. That commercial development not impact transit. I think that's probably close to 8. I'm probably paraphrasing them pretty accurately. So they were on the ballot, and they became the overriding 8 priority policies that all other planning decisions had to kind of be measured against. And clearly, even though you have 8, you need to balance between those 8. So there is still some balancing going on. But if a decision needs to be made, it needs to be made against those 8 priority policies. And so that became a kind of a major factor in making planning decisions, and which is repeated now. Whenever a planning decision is being made, is it in compliance with the 8 priority policies? It's a requirement. So that was on the ballot, along with the 1.5 million annual limit on office development, and it passed. And so, along with the downtown plan, and the hope really was that with the adoption of the downtown plan, that people would feel that there wouldn't be the need for Prop M and for the annual limit, but it passed anyway. So, the downtown plan was really a concession to, the opposition to downtown development, which the Proposition M tried to control with this 1.5 million annual limit, and ultimately, the 1.5 million limit through time really hasn't been a factor because of the business cycles it really didn't have an impact. In 1992, actually, there was a recession, so office buildings weren't built for a few years, so you were able to bank those 1.5 million square feet. So I think overall, the annual limit on office development, commercial development, really, didn't have an effect on development overall, I believe, in San Francisco. And the 8 priority policies, I think, are guiding. They're good policies, and there's no need to change them that I see at this point in time. And they're a working policy. So that's kind of where, through 85 and the 80s, kind of my involvement in developing the downtown plan, and then doing the first annual limit projects, from 85 through 92. I still served as head of special projects and reviewed all those major development proposals that came through 92. And in 92, I became planning director. And other things that happened in the department, neighborhood commercial rezoning. I was not involved in that, but that was also a major effort in the department that comprehensively reviewed every neighborhood commercial area and zoned it to try to maintain the neighborhood character. Ultimately, I talked about Blockbuster and chains. The reaction to chains was something that ultimately led to legislation to limit formula retail type development, and that's something that is still ongoing in the department. How to deal with that, how to maintain the character of neighborhood commercial districts. Mission Bay is just another major piece, which was ongoing while I was director. Development of Mission Bay was primarily, while it was in the department, the chief administrative officer took a major role in developing that. And then that was kind of, while it was an effort within the department, it was kind of a shared effort, because it was kind of almost a quasi redevelopment area, in the sense that you're kind of doing a private sector redevelopment plan, in essence. And redevelopment also played a role, because they were planning to use some of the powers of redevelopment to implement Mission Bay. So again, that's a major effort. And as we all know, redevelopment no longer exists. The redevelopment law in California has been repealed. And kind of now, as I indicated, the next major planning efforts that are now ongoing is the whole southern waterfront, the Pier 70, and that whole area. And I think that is now the growth area for the city, south of Market and the southern waterfront. There'll probably be more pressure ultimately on the industrial area around the China Basin. Those are kind of the last remaining land resources that are relatively low density and potential for redevelopment, and clearly, and development. But those are also kind of the last places where we have our production, distribution, repair, which is something that was highly debated, and the department's concerned about is how do you keep those functions in the city that you need, the auto repair shops, the pet hospitals now, uses that we all want on occasion, and all maybe rely on occasion, but don't want next to us, and tend to be low intensity in terms of kind of the type of buildings they're in. And so the question is, how long can that be sustained in San Francisco, given the land pressures? And I guess that's, again, a challenge for future planners to think about and deal with.
Always going to be those, that's for sure.
Right.
I was interested you talked about a little bit of the perception from the public of the planning department or planning in general. as saving them from development like the Fontana Towers. Have you seen any evolution in the public perception of planning as a profession or the department?
Well, I think the public in this community, at least most of the public, loves planners. I think they see planning and planners as kind of doing, as I say, God's work of making cities better, more livable, more attractive, more fulfilling places to live. But again, as we all know, in doing that, there's always different points of view. I still see, the neighborhood groups are still active. I think as there's been more stability in the neighborhoods, which I think the planning department through zoning and through the plans has provided. I don't think, my sense is they're not as active as they were in the 70s and 80s and into the 90s. I think it's because we did such good planning and solved all their problems and protected their neighborhoods. So, I think you still have the kind of discretionary review, neighbor-to-neighbor issues, those, but I think overall, the neighborhoods in San Francisco are very stable, and I think the planning and zoning has, fostered that stability, and so I think neighborhoods are comfortable. Yes, there's change, but it tends to be more focused around projects and traffic and parking, the same issues. But I think the city has kind of learned how to deal with these issues. I think the level of outreach that the department is doing now is even greater than it was when I was active in the department. The various workshops that you do, making a very strong effort to be inclusive and to involve the community very actively in the planning process. It takes longer, it takes more effort, but I think ultimately it makes for a smoother, dialogue and for a smoother process. And I think to some extent, possibly in district elections and having district supervisors has also, fed into that level of stability and kind of greater, broader communication. Is that, before district elections, you had citywide view in terms of the body politic, and there maybe wasn't that much attention paid to individual neighborhoods because they could be traded off. No one was kind of responsible. No one was minding the store. And I think having district supervisors gives an individual supervisor both a sense of turf and responsibility to a constituency. And I think that has also kind of led to more stability in decision making. The supervisors are more actively involved in those planning decisions now, way more than through my experience, when we had supervisors elected at large. And that's probably a good thing because it forces everyone to talk and to explain themselves and to give their points of view. And then it also informs that individual supervisor of the issues and the various concerns, which they can then advocate to the full board. And so I think that's another ingredient that has kind of led to a smoother, less confrontational process.
So I'd like to maybe hone in on, could you, let me rephrase that. Could you explain how you came to be director? How did you get tapped to do that?
Luck. It's always a strange thing when directors change. I had great respect for Dean Macris as director, and Politics are politics. Mayors get to choose. Directors wear out their welcome over time for various reasons. So, often you have to make hard decisions, and it's a political appointment. The director serves, especially traditionally. I mean, the law has changed in terms of how directors get appointed. When I first started in the department, the planning director served at the pleasure of the mayor. So even though the planning commission hired the director, the mayor, in essence, appoints the planning commission. So there was always a kind of dialogue between the mayor having to feel comfortable with the planning director, because planning is so intimately involved with the neighborhoods in the city. And so I think selecting a director it is an important decision, because whoever gets elected, whoever gets appointed as director has to be a person that has a good rapport, the ability to have a good rapport with San Francisco, which is a very diverse city, culturally, ethnically, economically, every which way. And that position, especially when the mayor had the appointing authority, reflects on the mayor. And also major decisions are made in terms of what developments get approved, how things go. And mayors tend to like to keep control of those kinds of decisions because they're important to the city. So, a planning director has to be, have the confidence of both, the mayor, the commission, and the community. I think I was selected as director in '92 because of my background in neighborhood planning, my background in reviewing downtown projects. I was well known by the development community, the downtown community, and because of my neighborhood work in the past, I was well known by the neighborhood, citywide, pretty much. So I think people had a lot of confidence and trust in me, and so I think that's why I was appointed.
I have to imagine that coming into the director's position entails a high learning curve.
It does, yeah, for sure. But on the other hand, I had good teachers. I was close to Alan Jacobs when he was director. Because of the function and role I played in the department, both in terms of neighborhood planning and major project review, I was always basically a key advisor to the director. And in developing the downtown plan. I mean, that's kind of the role I played as a planner. I was fortunate enough to have that responsibility and the confidence of those prior directors, and Rai Okamoto. All the directors basically kind of relied on me as kind of their right hand during their directorships. And so I had good teachers. I was able to see how they operated and learn. So I think I had a very good apprenticeship, working with them and for them, so that when I was appointed, I was very comfortable in continuing.
Who was the mayor at that time when you became director?
Frank Jordan.
What were some of the challenges that you felt sort of most strongly being in that position, sort of within the context of planning in the city? I mean, what was sort of the biggest things on your plate that you?
Well, again, it's post 89 earthquake. Right. So there's a lot of building and rebuilding going on, and I think that really, Mission Bay was ongoing as a planning effort. Redevelopment was still active. And post-earthquake, it was just the recovery and making those major decisions. Rincon Plan had started before the earthquake, so kind of focusing on those areas was the major challenge, and just keeping keeping the city going. And as it indicated also, in 1992 through 94, while I was director, there was a serious recession, about as bad as 2007, 2008, and maybe even lasted a little longer. It was and the department had to really struggle to maintain itself because we were a fee-based department. And that was kind of probably one of my biggest challenges really as a manager is to try to keep the department together during some very lean and hard economic times. And kind of the way, and the department pulled together, and the way we did it was, there was a lot of work that was being kind of outsourced, EIR preparations and things like that, we took in-house. We said, look, it's either do the work in-house or lay off people. And I started programs like voluntary time off. I mean, we really stretched and kind of did, asked people, again, and people were willing to do that. And a lot of people said, gee, great, yeah, I'd like to work 3 days a week or 4 days a week, or I'd like to take 2 months off and go to Europe. So it was, it was the reality we had to deal with, and we, as planners, we did it creatively. We said, okay, how can we got this problem? We're planners, we can figure this out. and so we used various strategies like, as I say, voluntary time off, and doing more work internally that we would normally, send out for the people to do. So we held the department together. So that was a challenge that was kind of unique, and it was pretty deep at the time. I don't want to leave the session without mentioning the AIDS epidemic and its impact on the department and the department's response to that tragedy. In 1982, one of the first AIDS cases in San Francisco was a planner in our department. And people didn't understand AIDS. They were afraid of AIDS. There was all kind of, just fear. It's unknown. It's a disease. Will it spread? How does it spread? A lot of unknowns. And our department pulled together as a family, very compassionately, to be supportive. And we didn't know, how many people would get it, I didn't look up the numbers. I'm sorry to say, I do have a list of all of our kind of AIDS people, and it's about a dozen. Very talented planners, there was always great camaraderie in the department, and when this tragedy just kind of hit, it was devastating. And people didn't know, will they get support, especially initially. It's like, you got so much sick leave, well, what do you do after that kind of thing?
Were gay planners out even at that time? Were people closeted, or did people largely know in San Francisco?
In the 70s, you were pretty out already. You knew as simple as that. And actually, the gay men in the department were also just very close together. I mean, it was. It was kind of wild times, right then. I mean, people coming out and kind of, you had your sex clubs. I mean, San Francisco was San Francisco, and so there was a lot of loving going on, to put it one way. That's kind of nice, but unfortunately, it turned tragic, and so people you loved all of a sudden got very ill, and initially very ill with something very unknown, and so, but everyone here in the department, we pulled together, and with compassion, we I mean, let people stay on and work, you know, for whatever reason they wanted to. I mean, it was therapy for them just to continue coming in and to try to, you know, live a normal life. You know, some people were really suffering, but you know, they'd rather come to work than, you know, stay home staring at a ceiling. So we went through that, and you know, as that kind of tragedy, you know, progressed and, you know, things got clearer, you know, I mean, there was more comfort to the extent that, you know, there is any comfort in that situation. And you know, we just did what we needed to do to help and support the people that were afflicted. There was a lot of contributing of vacation time and, you know, overtime hours in the department, you know, which again, these are kind of things that we started pressing for, you know, to get the administration, you know, to agree, to you know, steps to help, you know, accommodate people. And you know, initially, I mean, I think we were really on the forefront in doing all those kind of things of, you know, where we just did it informally. Well, you know, I'm going to give my hours to so and so because that person needs it, and just the support in terms of their personal lives, you know, running errands and being supportive, just so that people could function and live as well as possible under those circumstances. We just pulled together, you know, as a family, and were, as I think, as supportive as you could be under those circumstances. And it just was incredibly sad, and a lot of very talented people were lost. You know, were lost to the department and to the city, and not just here, but throughout the city. But you know, we had, you know, I'd say if 10% of the department was gay, you know, it's probably a good estimate at the time. So we're talking, well, probably more, quite frankly. 10 out of the closet, 10% out of the closet, another 20%. But anyway, you know, we lived through it. Ultimately, the quilt project was something that, when that started out, the department was very active in all the various you know, support programs and that ultimately evolved and developed to help people with AIDS. But the early years were really, really hard because none of the medication that's available now was available. I mean, folks were just kind of getting the disease and dying relatively quickly. And so to see that happening, young people, you know, talented people, you know, lovely people that, you know, just you didn't want to, you know, you didn't expect it, and it just shouldn't have happened, shouldn't be, you know, but it was. So I just wanted to acknowledge that as part of the, you know, the history of this department. And the fact that, as I say, that this department is very compassionate and very supportive.
Just because we started talking a bit about it, I'd be curious if you could talk about other things that the department was doing in general to sort of build good relations with people within. I mean, what sort of were there activities that the department would do after work hours, or what were things that the department did sort of come together in general?
There's an annual Christmas party, kind of a potluck. Groups. I played baseball together when I was director. We did some community service projects. You know, as companies do go out. Actually, what we ended up doing is doing a cleanup project by Mission Rock. Kind of, you know, so that was. So we did, you know, do various. And the point is, you know, the department is small. I mean, 100 people. You know, you know everybody, and there's a lot of after work socializing, going out for a drink. So, I mean, I think a camaraderie was there, invited to each other's homes for parties on occasion. So I think there was a certain amount of life, beyond work, and celebrating when certain projects were done, going out and having, celebratory dinners and things like that. So that might have been done more in sections, but I guess the annual Christmas party was the big thing. Kind of the other major kind of events we had to kind of celebrate planning. A couple of things happened while I was director. One, the American Planning Association conference was here in San Francisco. So as a department, we pulled together as being the host department, and staff volunteered to do the various field trips and explain, kind of the show and tell of planning for the conference. And then, as I was mentioning to Anne Marie earlier, is the zoning code was 50 years old, and then the master plan, I have to check the dates, we also celebrated, the master plan itself had an anniversary, also like the 25th and 50th, something like that. I don't quite remember the dates, but we actually had kind of a major celebration of planning, and we got the green room in the War Memorial Building for a kind of a major kind of outreach party where the community was invited. And we kind of did, in terms of oral histories, Alan Jacobs and former directors were invited. So Alan came, and I'm just trying to remember, I'm sorry, I'm drawing a blank on the name of the other former director before Alan.
Kent?
Not Kent. It was he was an interim. He was still alive. I know the problem. Kent was no longer living at the time. I can picture his face. I can't remember his name. But I'd have to check through some of my records. Apologize if it's important. We can.
We should know too.
Dub it in. I'm just sorry. I'm drawing a blank on his name.
Me too. I'm trying to bring up that list.
Yeah. So, I mean, that was a kind of a major, celebrating planning in San Francisco. And as I was mentioning to Anne Marie, 2015 will be another milestone. I think it's 75 years. So it's something to start planning for. So I think staff, kind of enjoyed their work, and I think again planning is a very fulfilling profession because you're trying to do what's best, for the environment, for the community, for people, to make the world in our immediate environment. Why not the world? Cities are parts of the world, and to the extent that we do that and make it a better place, and advance notions of stewardship and just making life a better, more satisfying, fulfilling event through our built environment. So let me just kind of also talk about some of the residential rezoning work that was done, because that was a major piece during the same time period. Because of all the discretionary review requests and conflicts in neighborhoods when people wanted to kind of expand their homes, the various neighborhoods wanted to kind of get zoning to be more reflective of the actual development patterns in those neighborhoods. And so you had neighborhoods like Cow Hollow that has a mix of 1 and 2 family buildings, and also zoning is mixed very closely together. You have single family zoning right cheek and jowl with 2 and 3 family. And so the different zonings create potential conflicts. And then the neighborhoods themselves were developed over, residential neighborhoods were developed over different times by different developers, often sometimes tract developers like the Sunset. You have your Dolger Homes there, Forest Hills, Ingleside Terrace. These were all developments that were done as kind of planned neighborhoods and planned communities at the times they were built. And so they reflect different development patterns based on what the developer wanted to put on the ground. And the overlaying zoning didn't necessarily reflect those patterns. And in many cases, the overlaying zoning would allow for more development, more additions to buildings, which then led to conflict, where people kind of bought a house and then kind of looked at the zoning and said, oh gee, I can add a floor, or I can add this wing over here. And so people, as housing pressure increased, people started to look at, rather than buying a new, bigger house, how do I expand my existing house? And that often led to conflicts because as homes change and get bigger, they block light and air, and cause other impacts on adjacent neighbors. And that process basically resulted in discretionary review requests, which the Planning Commission under the city charter has a right to review any permit and to see and use their discretion as to whether to approve it or not. And so you had many requests for discretionary review coming from neighborhoods and from neighbors. And ultimately the commission said, gee, can't we look at neighborhoods and rezone them in ways so that we can minimize these conflicts? A major departmental effort went into looking at all the residential areas in the city and mapping and analyzing. And ultimately, when proposals were made to modify the zoning controls for the single-family and two-family districts, there was relatively great opposition. Broad notice was given. We actually did a newspaper print, and every property owner in the city was given a mailed notice of the new zoning proposals. And when it finally came to kind of making a decision, there was really more opposition than acceptance. And my sense is that people are change adverse, and probably the detailed outreach that would have needed to be done to make this effective wasn't done. Even though there were neighborhood activists that were very interested and very much involved in pursuing the rezoning, the broader city wasn't ready for it. And so a lot of effort went into kind of this rezoning effort, and ultimately, if you want to say, was there a planning failure, I'd say this was one that, a job that wasn't completed. What ultimately happened is that, individual neighborhoods, and that was kind of the approach, rather than trying to do it citywide, we would do this neighborhood by neighborhood. And that process started. One of the first neighborhoods that kind of got its own zoning controls was Bernal Heights, not even the whole hill, but just portions of the hill. The west slope and east slope had specific code provisions that kind of was drawn up unique to those particular neighborhoods. And that section is still in the planning code today, governing those areas. Miraloma Park is another neighborhood that had a very unique development pattern, and ultimately the neighbors there drew their own zoning. I mean, with our help, we developed a zoning concept and map for Miraloma Park, and again, through petitions, it was kind of made clear that there was very strong support for that rezoning in Miraloma Park, and it was adopted as part of the revision to the zoning code. And that was kind of where that whole residential rezoning effort was left. Basically the conclusion was that it would have to go forward neighborhood by neighborhood rather than citywide. And so I think there were a few more neighborhoods that came along and kind of worked with the department to do unique zoning for their neighborhood, but the effort to kind of do it citywide was just never completed.
Were there existing relationships with neighborhood organizations or neighborhood activists that the department was building off of, or was this a new experience building these relationships?
There were existing neighborhood associations. San Francisco always had a tradition of neighborhood associations. Many neighborhoods that were kind of built as kind of subdivisions in their days have clubhouses, like Miraloma Park, for example. There's a Miraloma Park clubhouse on O'Shaughnessy Boulevard, which belongs to the association. Forest Hills has a clubhouse, and so you have a few of these, throughout the city, and you always had a tradition of neighborhood associations, just to address issues, whether it's crime or street cleaning or tree planting. So but again, in the evolution of planning, they were less sophisticated, and a lot more outreach would have had to be done, and a lot more education, and I think that's what it takes. And that's kind of where I think the department is now, is that you have community planning efforts now that are with a strong outreach component, and that's really what it takes to bring in the community and to get consensus.
And before those neighborhood rezoning efforts, did the department have relationships with those organizations or not? Or was it sort of all about establishing new relationships with those people?
It was probably more about establishing new relationships, because these associations would come to us and say, hey, look, we have these problems, or they would spring out of a discretionary review case where people would come together and say, hey, look, we've got a problem, we need to solve this. So they did come to us. Many of these associations had zoning committees. The problem, I think, was that it took a lot of effort, and the department really didn't have the time and expertise, the time to spend with individual neighborhood groups to go to the level of detail and development in terms of what it takes in terms of outreach, communication, education. It gets easier over time as people get more sophisticated, learn more about planning, and I think part of what we did as planners was to lay some of that groundwork, and I think the department now is building on that, because people now know more about what planning and zoning is. Before that, people, what's zoning? Unless you wanted to do something on your property, you never even knew that zoning existed. It's only once it impacts you directly, you go through the effort of, well, what is this zoning stuff? What does it mean? And I think the community now at large is more just more aware of planning, the tools of planning, and how the system works. So it's easier to plan.
Were there efforts that followed on the heels of those where it was clear that the department had learned from its mistakes and was now doing community outreach differently?
I think kind of that whole effort wore out a lot of people. It took many years. There were a lot of neighborhood people that we kind of joked, because I know one neighborhood activist, when this process first started, she'd come to the meetings with her baby daughter, in a cradle, and by the time we got to the hearings, that little baby girl was in high school. So it literally took that long. So I think people just got worn out through the process. So I'm not making this up. it literally took about that long. Yeah. It's a process that started in the 80s and kind of got abandoned in the mid-90s. It just kind of said, well, this isn't working. It's just, and it may have been just trying to do it citywide was just too much. It's just the process and the effort just took on way too much of a scope and involved too many people, and people just weren't comfortable with it, and so it just kind of it devolved into, look, we can't do it this way. We need to do it at a smaller scale. And that's what happened, and just some neighborhoods just didn't pick up on it. I'd say most of them actually didn't. So that's why it's still kind of business as usual. If there's any kind of planning to be done, and no one wants to touch it. It gets controversial, and somehow I think there's a certain complacency at this point. It kind of seems to be working, and so the energy isn't there, and motivation isn't there right now to take it on as an issue.